Welcome, everybody, to the Resistance broadcast. I'm John. Thanks so much for joining us today. James and Lacey with me as always, and we have a special one for you. We have no Will of the Force. I apologize.
It's
no
not
Resistance
back,
transmissions. Baby. I apologize for that. No tweets from you. But what we do have, as you saw probably by clicking in, is an interview with the animation director of ILM. I think the first Oscar winner we've ever had on the podcast, if I remember correctly. Also an Emmy winner, Hal Hickel. And Lacey, we nerded out pretty hard.
Obsessed. I feel like I say that for every guest, but I'm obsessed with Hal Hickel.
You do say that, and everyone's the best, but he's certainly up there. And
he's so fun.
So James, they're in for a good time right now, right? They got to buckle up, baby.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we went into the interview with, kind of what we had in mind, and he just like expanded on every idea and took it to the ends of the story, that all the little tidbits and everything. I think there is a big payoff to anybody who's wanting to go on the journey with Hal. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a lot of Star Wars and more, all the way dating back to his work with Toy Story and him being a kid and a dreamer. I mean, his story is inspiring, but also just the tangents that he takes us on through his answers and finds himself coming full circle back around to the root of it. It's an incredible discussion. Obviously, you'll see by the time, as you're looking right now, a long episode, so you're in for a really meaty interview with someone who's really important to Star Wars right now and has been since the prequels, connecting to George Lucas, and you're going to get some fun George Lucas stories in here too. So here it is, our interview with Hal Hickel. Enjoy. Hal, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Resistance broadcast. We appreciate you taking the time to chat with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right. Now, our audience obviously knows what you're all about. We just gave you a glorious intro at the top of the show here, but I have to ask you, just from a real life, just to break the ice here, real life standpoint, if you're out at a party and you meet acquaintances, casual people, and they're like, "Oh, Hal, so what do you do?" Like, how deep do you go? Like, and then like to avoid the follow-ups, or do you like the follow-ups? Like, how does that go when Hal Hickel's at a party and he meets people and he tells them what you do?
I keep it as brief as possible because I find that people glaze over pretty quickly if I try to get too far into details. And that depends on the person too, because what I'm mainly talking about is the sort of technical aspect of my work, and trying to get too far into how we use computer animation and yada. I just try to keep it at a very high level. But even with regard to Star Wars stuff, because you never know, sometimes you can be talking to somebody that's amazing to them, and they're like, "Oh my God, Star Wars, that's so cool." But you'd be surprised how many people I meet who are like, "Oh, yeah, I never really," which is going to sound really weird to you and your audience, but yeah. I meet people regularly who are like, "Yeah, I think I saw one of those films," So then it's right. It's like,
man, if people are glazing over with you, I'm in trouble.
No, but
I'm in a lot of trouble at parties when we get to go to parties.
I think it's common with visual effects folks generally that they get they've been through the thing of aunts and uncles or just random people asking, "Oh, what do you do?" And you start to tell them in detail. And they just kind of like, and you're like, "Oh, okay. Hang on, let me. I work on movies. Is that, how's that?"
Yeah. So. Are you? So I'm sure every once in a while you meet the person who's like, "Oh man, I've been dying to find out how they do this." And are you like, do your ears spring up, or are you just like, I don't want to talk shop today?
It's fun. It's super fun. Honestly,
Okay.
It is. If somebody's really into it and is, and has good questions and is really interested in it, I love that. It reminds me that what I'm doing, that I need to be grateful for what I do for a living, because, there's people out there who find it super exciting, and that's awesome. It's kind of like, we can give, personal tours to like friends and family at Lucasfilm, of course, not during COVID, but that's one of the things I always enjoyed doing, because that totally reminds me when people are walking around ILM and there's, models and different things from past shows, and they're all jazzed about it. And it, reminds me to be grateful that, yeah, it's a cool job.
That is cool.
And I'm lucky. So
do you feel like you've ever gotten like too behind the curtain? Because I definitely know like when there's like music that I listen to, having been in the music industry, I go, oh, I don't know that this is as special to me as it probably is to a lot of people, because I know what they're doing. I know the tricks. I see
sure.
the secrets on their live show and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So like, do you ever feel like Star Wars is kind of not as engaging as it once was?
Well, no, it's engaging in a different way now than it would be if I were just, a fan and didn't have any connection to the inside. I can't enjoy it in the same way that I did, before I worked on it, but I enjoy it in a different way now that to me is just as rewarding. So it never becomes like, whatever, more Star Wars, yeah, whatever, or really any, or just filmmaking generally. That's never gotten. I mean, everyone has hard days where they kind of hate their job or whatever, just for this or that reason. And I'm not saying that, but generally speaking, no, I still love what I do, whether it's Star Wars or films for other studios that are unrelated to Star Wars. I'm still jazzed about it. I like, getting in there and doing the work.
Is there one?
That's so cool.
Is there one scene since you've been with Lucasfilm ILM since Phantom Menace? Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there one scene since you've been with the company that you wish you could have seen as a fan and gotten the surprise that we all get? Is there one that stands out? You're like, man, that would have been amazing to see as a fan.
Well, gosh, it would have to be the Vader reveal in Empire, but of course I got to see that as a fan. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I can't think of a reveal like within one of the movies that was quite that huge since then. That really compares. So like, there have been movies I've worked on over the years where I thought, wow, this would have been cool. Well, like for instance, Rogue One. I try to, any film I work on, I try to get out on opening weekend because, you don't get invited to a premiere on every project, but generally do. And I often have, I've been lucky. And, and there are other friends and family screenings and this and that. But on opening weekend, I try to get out and just see it with like an audience, like just a normal audience who's seeing it for the first time. And that was especially great on Rogue One because, the film, especially in the third act, takes some turns that I don't think anyone expects when they're, hey, it's Star Wars, and then everyone starts getting killed. And it was really a trip to kind of watch the audience, but also like, when Tarkin is revealed and to kind of gauge people's reactions and see how they think of that and Leia at the end and all that, and the Vader scene in the hallway at the end and all that stuff was super fun. So that's the way I do it now because I am on the inside. The way I kind of get that excitement of being, a fan. I do it by, embedding myself in the theater on opening weekend and just soaking up the reactions of folks. And that's almost as good.
So a friend of mine, Chad, and I'm going to say his name because I want to embarrass him. We saw Rogue One opening night, and he had a few drinks, and he's not a diehard Star Wars fan, but he likes Star Wars a lot, and he was there with me opening night. And Tarkin comes on screen, and he goes, I can't believe they got that guy back. He looks the same. And I don't want to make a scene and disrupt the movie for everybody, but I like almost lost it. I was like, dude, come on. I mean, good job to you guys because you fooled Chad. But I was like, wow, that is amazing that he didn't realize.
I love that his name is Chad in that story.
Peter Cushing has been 65 years old for the last 40 years. It's fantastic.
Yeah, we had the whole range of reactions with him, which is fine. It's what we expected. You can't, when you're doing a known, well, number one, CG humans are just hard to do. They're the hardest thing in our business to do. And it's even harder when it's a known celebrity, a known actor, right? Because everyone kind of knows what they look like. And
close-ups of the face. It's not like they're a person just over there in the distance in the dark or
Yeah,
something.
exactly. And I
Yeah.
think we got, particularly with Tarkin, I think we got as far as I hoped to, which is to say that we had reactions like your friend Chad. We were like, wow, how'd they get that guy back? Or if they hadn't had a drink beforehand, might have said, well, wow, they found an actor who looks just like Peter Cushing. That's amazing. You know, that's great. That's awesome. Then, of course, you know, you've got people who maybe are visual effects nerds or whatever, or work in the industry, who are more critical. And, you know, I've seen lots of, you know, enough comments online to know that there was a segment of the audience that was like, well, I didn't quite buy it, but blah, blah, blah. And I just knew going into it that no matter how good a job we did, there are always going to be some reactions like that. Because like I said, if you know the actor's dead, then you're looking for the effect. You know it's an effect. It has to be an effect, right? The guy's not living. So there's only so, you know, you can only take it so far. But I was happy with the reaction because I've met tons of people who've been like, oh yeah, my dad is not that into Star Wars, and my parents had no idea that it was, or whatever, you know. So we've gotten lots of good Chad reactions like that tell me that, you know, that we did okay. But it's really, that's a hard thing to do. I don't like doing digital humans, to be honest. It's a lot of work, knowing that at the end of the day, you're still going to have a segment of the audience that balk at it just because they know it can't. Because the thing is, if you were doing a CG human that wasn't recognizable, well, what's the point of that? I mean, you might as well just hire an actor to play that role if it's not a specific person.
Right.
So you're almost always doing, you know, a young version of an older actor, or an actor who's passed away, or something in these cases. And to me, that you spend all your time just trying to get the likeness perfect and everything, and you're still going to have a segment of the audience, no matter how good it is. But that said, like 4 or 5 months after Rogue One, Blade Runner 2049 came out. And my friend John Nelson was a visual effects soup on that. And the young Rachel they did was, I just thought, I was like, okay, the bar has been raised again. I thought
that was insane.
I thought that was amazing. So anyways, too much talk about digital humans.
No, I wanted to go further. I was going to ask, like, you talking about a certain segment of people that are critical of it because they're in the industry, or they you know that kind of stuff. What is your opinion when you see people trying to correct visual effects in some of your work?
It's totally understandable, particularly now with the whole deepfakes thing. I mean, you know, that tool set being free and available to anyone who wants to dig into it and do it. I don't blame them. And the thing that people have to remember, though, with one exception, which is, well, what I was going to say is, generally what they do is, because they don't have access to the footage that we started with. So what they're usually doing is working on top of the work we've already done. So I don't worry about it, where I don't look at it and go, oh my God, they've done better than us. It's like, well, yeah, they started with what we did, and then and even with that, you could make the argument, well, then why didn't you do that if it looks better? But then what you get into is a subjective thing. It's like, does it look better? It looks different. I could point to some things that I don't like as much, and some other things that I do like better. So anyway, so there's that whole side of it, which is in the cases where they've done it, where they've basically sort of run a deep fake on top of our Tarkin, let's just say, or Leia or whatever. To me, I'm like, well, yeah, okay, you know, and you know, you built on top of what we did, and it's kind of subjective whether it's better or not. Now, the exception to that is the Corridor guys. They did a Luke thing recently, and they did a thing, and I admired this, where they went all the way back to the beginning. They got somebody from their crew that they felt resembled Luke enough physically or whatever, and they shot their own plates, did their own work on top of it. And there I was like, okay, that's legit. They've gone all the way back to the beginning and done the whole process themselves. Now, I think that even there, though, the end result, it's a subjective toss-up. It's like, well, is it better? It's certainly different. It's a lot different. And they, because they don't have bosses, they're free to do whatever they want. Like, they're like, well, we thought it'd be cool if there were sparks over here and the interactive lighting would really make it feel in the plate. And it's like, well, yeah, that's great. But what if that's not what the director wanted? Or what, you know what I mean? Like, so they have a freedom that allows them to kind of just play in their sandbox. Now, none of that means that it's bad. It just means that they're not quite playing in the same ballpark that we are in terms of the constraints on them and all the things that have to be taken into account, where, they can just, it's their sandbox and they can do whatever they want. But
True.
Catch me yelling in caps at people. Shut up, it looked
Yeah,
great. Because I'm that person. I cried. I was
Yeah.
so happy to see Luke. I felt like I was 7 again. I thought it was absolutely perfect.
Oh,
so those
man.
people, I'm
glad
yelling
to
at
hear that.
caps.
But the shorter answer is, it doesn't make me angry. I don't think those people are jerks. It's
Sure.
like, it's awesome. They're passionate about visual effects. They have an interest in it.
Right.
Go for it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't look at it and go, oh my God. Oh yeah. Well, that's it. Well, let's hire those guys instead. It's like,
Yeah.
but it's a great conversation to have. And deepfakes is,
Mhm.
but here's the thing. What I'm way more interested in terms of deepfakes and that whole world, there's a film this year in contention, a documentary in the Oscars called Welcome to Chechnya. And it's a film about gay people in Chechnya who are, their lives are at risk because of the police are rounding them up and torturing them. It's awful. And so there's a network of folks in Russia who have been spiriting these folks out of Chechnya into Russia and then getting them out of Russia to other countries around the world where they can live their lives. And because the documentary features some of these folks who are in that transition of getting out of Russia, they can't reveal their identities. And in past documentaries, you might have done it with, it's a silhouette with like a voice changer, or something like that. But the filmmakers really wanted the audience to be able to connect with these people and empathize with them. And so they used deepfake to give them new faces. So
Holy
they could
cow.
still
Wow.
emote, but they didn't look like themselves. And they got Russian speaking folks to dub their voices. So it's not a voice changer. It's a real human voice, but it's not their voice. And
Wow.
and they didn't try to do it seamlessly. Like in many shots, you can see a little blurred edge or something, because the point wasn't to fool the audience into thinking it's a different person. The point was merely to disguise them, but disguise them in
To
a way
protect
that they
them,
could
yeah.
emote.
Oh,
That
okay.
to me, I'm like, I've been thinking about that nonstop since I saw it. And so to me, that's a way more interesting application of, and worthwhile, let's say it, worth application of this technology for something, life-saving. It's incredible.
It's crazy how much power there is in technology.
Yep.
I think when we think about this type of technology, we fear it immediately because we go, oh no, now you can make anybody say
and that's-
anything. But like we forget about
Yeah.
the humanitarian use of technology, which is involved in protecting
Yeah,
people.
well, it really pleased me because, like you just mentioned, that's been my, something in the back of my mind ever since deepfakes appeared, which was like, oh boy, this is going to be ugly. We're going to start seeing all kinds of fake videos of politicians or whatever. And then to see this documentary, and I thought, oh well, here's the light side of the force,
Right.
of this force,
Right.
being used for good. So, anyways, whatever. So, deepfakes.
Yeah, killer answer, man. I
yeah.
loved that. Yeah. What a great
I don't
discussion.
know what you can answer on this, but in terms of the decision making and the back and forth with the creators of the show, like Jon Favreau and with The Mandalorian, is it a situation where he comes to you and your team and he's like, I don't want to recast a Luke Skywalker. I want you guys to do all this, make it work? Or is it like you guys push back and say like, he wanted an actor and you're like, nah, we got this idea. Like, what's the give and take? Does it depend on the creator? Is it more of ILM has a set standard for each project? Like, how does that give and take work?
Yeah, sure. I will say that particular aspect of the effects of season 2 is probably the thing I can talk about the least. But I will say this: one, it was always important for everyone involved to have Mark involved. So it's not just like, well, we'll recast and then we'll deepfake over him. Mark had to be involved with crafting the performance. And so he was there on set when the scene was shot. And, he's totally involved all the way through. Also, Peyton Reed, who directed that episode, he had done some previous de-aging work in Ant-Man with the Michael Douglas character in Ant-Man.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
he had worked with some folks and a process and everything for that. And so that played a part in what we did and how we did that work. And it was part of the decision-making progress. So Richard Bluff, who's the overall visual effects supervisor on Mandalorian, and myself as Anim Soup, we were both very much involved and giving feedback on the work and presenting it to John and Peyton and Dave. But those were the primary, I would say, drivers of how we did the scene that was in season 2, which was, you know, Peyton's experience on Ant-Man, and that Mark had to be involved. And then that drove a lot of the sort of procedural decisions later on about how things would be shot and in what order and how we do the work and all that stuff.
Wow, that's great.
Which is a little vague, I realize, but
no, and I appreciate it. Trust me, yeah.
I mean, I could talk all day long about CGI banthas, but when it comes to Mark and his scene, I see a little bit higher level.
Yeah, I mean the Mark Hamill involvement is enough for me, because I feel like that has been a little bit vague. You know, how he was involved and stuff, and it's good to hear that he was there. And he was on set,
and that was
awesome.
I mean, I'll just say that for, you know, you talk about, you know, does this ever become blasé? You know, being on a movie set for the purpose of shooting a Star Wars scene, you know, with Mark Hamill. I mean, I don't think I've ever.
I was gonna say, as a Star Wars fan, like, how do you ever top that? Being
I think I just had to retire.
Skywalker.
Yeah, I think I'm done. I think that was it.
Hal's going to more parties now.
Yeah, being a Star Wars fan, just as a fan, what is your favorite Star Wars movie, and then which episode of The Mandalorian has been your favorite?
I don't really like any of them that much. No, I'm kidding.
Oh my god!
No.
And done. And scene.
No, the new Ep 4 will always be my favorite. I recognize that for many reasons, and you know, that can be pointed to, Empire Strikes Back is more polished and has more sort of grown-up drama, et cetera. You know, I've kind of been aware for many years of all the reasons that many people, at least for a long time, we're kind of in a new world now, because everyone has a new perspective on the prequels, which they didn't have when they first came out. And then everyone, you know, and then there's people have different opinions about the sequels, and there's different generations and all that. But for a long time, you know, the conventional wisdom was Empire's the best film of the original trilogy, at least. But for me, nothing's ever going to top 4. And it's not like I would ever try to convince anybody of that, because for me, it's just very personal about having, you know, seen it at age 13 and had my consciousness expanded, you know, massively. Absolutely. And I was living on a ranch in Colorado, and I wanted to work in animation, and I also was a NASA nerd. So like I couldn't have been a better target for it, because here's Luke, you know, he's a farm boy. He wants to go to the stars. I'm a farm boy. I want to go to either the real stars or the Hollywood star, like one or the other.
You're like, this was written for me.
And I was already making stop motion films before it came out. So it interested me both on the fictional level of, you know, Luke and the whole fantasy of it, but the filmmaking level of it. I wanted to know how everything, you know, they did everything, because I was doing stop motion then, but it broadened my interest in visual effects into matte painting and miniatures and animated effects and, you know, all the other stuff. So it's always going to be that film. 77.
Wait, your Wikipedia says you wrote a letter and Gary Kurtz wrote you back at age 12. Is that true? And can you tell us, like, do you remember doing that? And do you remember like getting the letter back? And like, what would you remember that experience?
Yeah. I mean, they had announced that there was going to be a second film. And I thought, oh, well, I've got good ideas for a second, you know, 13-year-old. Maybe I was 14 by then. By the time it happened, So I wrote out, you know, some terrible idea. And I sent it off to, I guess.
You got to tell us what your idea was, Hal. You're not getting off the hook.
Do you remember that?
I didn't, you know, I actually have the letter somewhere, because they returned it. Well, I'll get to that in a second. I don't, off the top of my head, don't remember the exact thing, but it was something, you know, number one, we didn't know Luke and Leia were brother and sister, right? So in my mind, they're off, you know, running across the galaxy, chased by the Empire, probably with kids in tow by this point, you know, like a couple of kids, because I was a kid and I just thought, there should be kids in this, right? That I wanted to see myself in
Right.
it. So,
Oh yeah, yeah.
so it was something like that, you know.
George thought
But
so
I
too.
should. It's funny because people have asked me that a lot, and I need to the letters in a box somewhere, and I have it, but I need to dig it out and see my terrible 13-year-old handwriting, you know, on like lined paper. But I sent it off to the, I guess, Lucasfilm headquarters in LA. I didn't send it to a fan club or anything. I don't know how I got the address. Because their headquarters were in LA at that time. He hadn't yet moved back up to Northern California.
Mhm.
And so I got a letter back, and it wasn't from Gary. It was from Gary's assistant, Bunny Alsop. And Bunny, and you know, it was a very nice kind of sort of, not a form letter, but for 14-year-old me, it was a bit disappointing, you know, because it was like, well, you know, our lawyers have instructed us not to read any outside things, so we're sending back your idea unread. But you know, getting into Hollywood takes a certain combination of talent and luck, and an agent, he said. But it was nice, you know, it was kind, but it was also kind of, you know, this is how it's done, and you know. But I kept it. I kept the letter in the envelope, and you know, as the years passed, I started to notice a couple of things. One, it was on this really cool Ralph McQuarrie letterhead, which I thought, you know, as I got a little older, like that's pretty cool. And then I thought, oh, wait a minute, this is Gary Kurtz's, because it says in the thing, you know, assistant to the producer, blah blah blah. And I was like, you know, when I got a little older and had a little perspective, I was like, why on earth would the assistant to the producer be writing, personally typing replies to fan letters, because they must have been getting them by the thousands, you know, after Star Wars came out. And as it turns out, many years, like only like 7 or 8 years ago, I ran into Dorothy on LinkedIn, of all places.
Oh, wow.
And I messaged her and said, hey, you know, a billion years ago, I wrote this letter, and it really tickled her. And so we had a little conversation about it. And I asked her, I said, well, you know, why on earth? And she said that, you know, in the months leading up to shipping off to the UK to shoot Empire, it was just something she liked to do. And she would answer as many letters as she personally had time to get to.
That's awesome.
And I just thought, wow.
That's a hero.
That's
so
fantastic. So anyway, so that's the letter story. And then, you know, flash forward many years when I'm working at ILM now. We're wrapping Phantom Menace, and I had since framed the letter and it's hanging in my cubicle in our office at ILM. And we were having a big breakfast. It was a wrap breakfast for Phantom Menace. We'd finished the project, and George was there, and a few people kind of sheepishly started to bring up, you know, Phantom Menace posters and things for him to sign, because it's something nobody would ever do, obviously, when we're working on the film, right? It's not done. But now we're sort of celebrating it. And a little line formed, and George was very gracious, and he sat there at his table and, you know, started signing things. And Rob Coleman, who was the animation director of all 3 prequels, he said, oh man, go get that letter and have George sign it. And I was like, no. He's like, yeah, go get it. So I ran back to my desk and took it out of the frame and got in line, and I gave it to and I gave it to George, and he read it, and he kind of chuckled.
I feel like I got my letter signed listening to the story.
You know, he kind of chuckled, and he took the pen and he underlined talent and luck and wrote, you have it, and then signed his name.
Oh,
so that was like my big, like,
the
closing of the wheel, you know.
Yeah. Holy cow.
I love it.
That's like the Jim Carrey wrote himself a check for $1 million thing.
I've never heard that, but that sounds awesome.
Yeah, when he was a kid, his family was living in a car. His dad had lost his job. He said, "I'm gonna make it big," and he wrote himself a check for $1 million. And he's like, he cashed it when he got his first big thing or whatever. Like,
that's so great.
And you have that story. Like I'm sure I have letters that wound up in the dumpsters at like Batman fan clubs and stuff. Michael Keaton never got my letter, Hal. Like, come on.
I joke that my career path has either been that awesome example of someone chasing their dreams and finally getting achieving them, or it's a case of horribly arrested development that I'm doing a job that I set my sights on when I was 13 years old. I think it's probably a bit of both, actually. But
it's
lest
amazing.
I get too big-headed about it or anything.
Does it feel fast? Does it feel like you were working on Toy Story last year?
Kind of. I mean, yes, the last couple of decades have rushed by. I mean, I've been busy, which is great. I'm grateful for. And yet at the same time, if I really stop and think about it, Toy Story does seem like 2 lifetimes ago at the same time. Yes,
Sure.
The years have rushed by, but that really does seem like an awful long time ago. But I mean, I remember it vividly, my desk. It was a kind of intense time for me because I had been at Wolverton Studios up in Portland for 6.5 years, and I was really excited to take this job at Pixar. It was a huge break for me, massive break. I was super lucky.
Sure.
But it was also my first foray into animating in the computer, so there was a lot of stress and, can I do this and all that. And maybe because of all that sort of uprooting, moving to a whole new city and taking a job that I wasn't sure I could do and everything, it's really seared in my brain. Like I can just remember so many details about that time. But yeah,
because that seemed like that's one of those moments in animation that changed the game when it came to the Pixar, the 3D animation. And it's one of those styles of animation to this day, even though it's gotten better and better. You compare Toy Story, Toy Story 4, and it's just like, it looks like real rain puddles and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It captures my son's attention. He's 2. He likes the Pixar style of animation. It's so vivid, especially with the 4K TVs. And I'm not saying I just sit him in front of a TV all day, maybe sometimes, but did that moment and that movie being a success, is that like, does Jar Jar Binks happen if that kind of flops? Like, was that the way that George knew we can do a full realized character in a real life a live action movie?
Yeah, I mean, for George, the key was Jurassic Park, which came out about 3 years before that.
Yeah.
And so he knew, and actually Pixar came from Lucasfilm. It was the Lucasfilm Computer Graphics Group, and they did some shorts and things, and a few pieces for some of the features, like the Genesis effects for Wrath of Khan and the Stained Glass Knight and Young Sherlock Holmes. Let's see, by the time they were doing The Abyss, Pixar had already been sold off to Steve Jobs. But anyway, so in terms of George's path to Jar Jar, or realistic CG characters in live action, his had more to do with, once he'd sold Pixar, his own little group at ILM now taking on Abyss and T2 and Jurassic Park, and those were the stepping stones. But meanwhile, just across the bridge, 10 minutes away, Pixar was charging ahead, and they were, completing their first feature. And that was more revolutionary, I think, for the feature animation business than the visual effects business. The visual effects business was really, really transformed by Jurassic and a couple of projects before that, and work that some other non-ILM studios were doing. There were some studios in LA that were, Tron was done in LA and Last Starfighter, and so there was an evolution of some of the companies in LA as well. But the really big watershed moment, I think, for visual effects was Jurassic Park. I mean, I toured ILM because I'd met Dennis Muren at a conference around 91, I think, after he'd done, or maybe even earlier, 89 or 90. Anyways, he'd done T2, and then he'd taken a sabbatical from ILM to kind of learn computer graphics for himself. He bought a Mac and he just started digging into it. And then he came back to do, he didn't leave ILM, but he just took a little sabbatical. But his next project after that was Jurassic. And anyway, so I'd met him before Jurassic started, but after this sabbatical at this conference, and we'd stay in touch. He was very kind, very generous with his knowledge and time, and became a kind of a mentor to me. Not kind of it, became definitely a mentor to me, and encouraged me a lot. We'd talk on the phone periodically, and he'd be like, send a reel down here. And at the time, particularly once the computer graphics stuff was really taking hold, I didn't quite feel like I had the right experience under my belt yet, but he kept encouraging me. Anyways, all that to say, I visited ILM right when they were in the middle of making Jurassic Park, because I was driving down from Portland to Santa Barbara for a friend's wedding, and Dennis said, if you're ever passing through, give me a shout. I'll give you a tour of ILM. So that was my first peek at ILM. And they were middle of Jurassic Park. And in touring the place, because I'd been a visual effects nerd all the way, since Star Wars and all the way through the 80s and everything, I knew about a lot of the equipment there and the processes and everything. And so I was really excited to see, for instance, matte paintings where, I think you guys know, but in the pre-digital era, they were actually painted on glass or sometimes masonite and photographed and then optically combined with live action on. So they had this amazing camera setup for shooting matte paintings and other equipment like that. And it was all there, and I got to see it, and I was super excited because I'd been reading about it in Cinefex and Center all these years. Oh my God, that's the matte camera and this, that, and the other. So that was around 92 or whenever. And then 91. And then when I came there to work in 96, when I was hired in the middle of 96, so only 4.5 years later, something like that, all that stuff was gone. It was all computer desks. And they still had miniature stages and a model shop and all that, but all that other equipment. So it was a really fast transition, and probably pretty wrenching for a lot of the people at ILM who were doing practical, optical effects, who had to transition or retire or whatever, find a way to, get on in this new world. So I kind of missed all that. I'd been working in stop motion in Portland, and then I just got this lucky break to take an animation position at Pixar. And that was my transition into CG, which for me was happy because I was excited about it. I was like, this is the future. I want to do this. This is exciting. So I wasn't like, I love stop motion and I hate the computer, but what else can I do? I was really jazzed about it. So anyways, by the time I came to ILM, that revolution had already kind of occurred, and I could just kind of get into, I don't remember what question led to all this, but I think I've gone like all off the.
No,
totally okay, because actually it must be really cool to see all that stuff come back now from Mandalorian.
Yeah, totally. Well, actually, but I remember you were asking about Toy Story, and the transformation of the industry. And so all that just to say that I had my own mini transition from stop motion to CG, but the big, really kind of revolutionary transition at a place like ILM from practical effects to CG happened right before I got there. And it just sort of finished happening, or was still kind of, the dust was still settling as I got there. Because my first project there was, ironically, was Jurassic 2. And I say ironically because when Jurassic 1 came out and I was still doing stop motion, I thought computer animation was going to kill my career. Because I was like, I don't know anything about computer animation. I want to be a stop motion animator. They're not gonna do visual effects that way anymore. So anyways, then my first project at ILM, several years later was Jurassic 2. But so yeah, I don't know. Anyways, so Lacey, sorry, what were you? Oh, Mandalorian. And
I was saying it's kind of funny that you went on this tangent because all that stuff has now come back for the Mandalorian. They did stop motion stuff for the Mandalorian. They did the model building. So what's that been like at ILM and Lucasfilm, and that those people that were once like, oh, what am I going to do now? Are like, oh, so I'm back again. Hey,
like
what's
Phil
up?
Tippett came back, right?
Yeah, no, it's been really fun. Because there are, we reached a place starting about 10 years ago, I'd say, but really in earnest about 5 years ago, where there was a generation of directors who didn't make films back in the practical visual effects days, but grew up on those films. And so now that they're grown-ups and they're making movies, they kind of really wanted to use a lot of, rubber creature masks and animatronics and stuff.
Like JJ?
Like JJ. Yeah. And a lot of that's been great. There are cases, I'm sure, though, where it's more about nostalgia than necessarily what the right technique is for a thing. And I'm not too into that. And I'm not talking about JJ. I'm just saying, just generally across movies I've watched and I've seen some stuff where I read an article about, we're not using any CGI in this movie. And then the movie comes out and it's got 1,200 CGI visual effects shots in it that they won't talk about. That happens. It's just a thing. But the thing with Jon Favreau is he's yes, he has nostalgia about different techniques, and he's honest about that when that's a driver of a decision he's making. But I think what he's way more interested in is what is the audience's reaction and how to use the different effects techniques to get the reaction he wants to get out of the audience. And you know, sometimes that might be a component of that is always nostalgia. But part of it, he understands that there's a segment of the audience that if they see a rubber mask or a stop motion creature is going to have nostalgia for that. But he also understands that there's younger people who might think it looks weird and creaky and old fashioned looking. So he tries to, you know, find the sort of middle path where he's kind of taking from all the different places and using the right tools for the job for, you know, whatever effect we're trying to do. And so we've got, you know, a lot of rubber, you know, Legacy Effects has been killing it with the baby, the child to begin with. But all kinds of other great, like they did great practical corns. We did digital ones as well, depending on what we need them to do. But they've just done tons of great stuff on the show, androids and all kinds of things. So they've been amazing. And John is really good at mixing sort of their work with the digital work from ILM and figuring out when and where to use which thing. And, you know, I play a role in that, as Richard Bluff does, and Joe Bauer and the other visual effects soups. And the other directors on the episodes too, obviously have a voice and all that. But I first worked with John on the first Iron Man. And even there, we had a lot of conversations about when to use the practical Iron Man suit and when to use a digital suit, and and sometimes mixing the two, where parts of it were practical and parts of it were digital. And that's, to me, that's really, I love that, because it keeps the audience guessing. Hopefully they'll just sort of give up at a certain point, not worry about what they're looking at. But you know, they get that little bit of tactileness. Yeah, exactly. But they'll get, you know, there are things that you can see that you're like, well, that's rubber. Pretty sure rubber. Or, you know, whatever, silicone or whatever. And then other things where you're like, oh, I think that's CG, but then it'll do something that'll surprise you, because, oh, wait, is that really CG, or is that really rubber?
I mean, BB-8's a prime example. Yeah, everyone thought BB-8 was CG, and then BB-8 rolled out at Anaheim, and everyone was like, wait, what?
That was crazy. Yeah.
BB-8 is an awesome example of great engineering and just really clever work. Yeah, absolutely.
I want to ask you, because this is, we're going down this path. I had this question coming into the thing, is like, you're all over the board with different types of animation when it comes to claymation, like doing the Raisins back in the day, and being involved in that type of stuff. And then even in computer animation with like Toy Story, we were talking about Rango later down the line, and obviously all sorts of visual effects like what we've seen in Mandalorian and Star Wars and stuff. But I'm curious, what's out there that is flying under the radar that you think is the next, like maybe a project a colleague of yours is working on that's just pushing the boundaries of something that is really cool in animation?
Good question. I mean, in terms of technology, real-time stuff is obviously getting bigger and bigger and bigger. We use real-time rendering on the volume on the LED stage that we shoot on, but it's going to have inroads all over visual effects, in terms not just speeding up people's work, but just in how we even do things, because you're able to render things in real time. So that's making big inroads. Also, all kinds of different applications for AI is going to be huge. In fact, the thing to me that's both scary and exciting about AI is that I suspect that, I don't know, 5 years from now, whatever is big, whatever cool thing it's doing that's really essential to visual effects is something that nobody even thought about now. It's not like, oh, I can see where it's going and where we're going to end up.
Oh, wow.
I feel like 5 or 10 years from now, we'll be like, man, I had no idea this is what we're going to be doing. This is crazy. Wow. So those are exciting. In terms of specific projects, I don't know if you guys know who Jorge Gutierrez is. He's an animation director. He directed Book of Life. He's got a project.
Those are beautiful.
At Netflix right now. That's kind of, he calls it a sort of a Mexican Lord of the Rings, big fantasy, sprawling epic, but in his kind of signature style. And so I'm dying to see that whenever it comes. You know, they're in the middle of it. I have no idea.
Do you know what kind of a style are we talking here?
We'll go.
Because I know.
Oh, go ahead.
For me, I was just gonna say like there's a lot of really cool stuff that's happening as far as like, so take like Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse stuff. They're doing like
totally
3D to try to make it 2D, or like Klaus, they're doing 2D and trying to make it look 3D, and it's like that stuff is so cool to me. What kind of a style are we talking
his
here?
style is really unique. It's hard to even describe. You'd have to just kind of look up his artwork. As soon as you see his artwork,
good,
you'll know. Like you'll just see it. Go, oh wow, okay, great. Because his stuff looks like nobody else's. But I'm glad you mentioned those two, because I mean, Spider-Man, I was so excited for it to come out, and then when it came out, I was even more excited. Like when I saw it, I took my son to a screening, and my son, he's 20 now, so that was a couple of years ago, so he was like 18. And he and I just totally geeked out over that movie, because it's just
so good.
And you're absolutely right. A buzzword you hear a lot now, particularly at conferences about visual effects and animation, is NPR, not National Public Radio, but non-photorealistic is what NPR stands for now. And that rendering style, because for years and years, especially in visual effects, a big push in rendering technology and CGI technology generally was in achieving realistic images, realistic hair, realistic fire, realistic skin.
Right.
But I'm super excited about this whole NPR world of projects like Spider-Verse and Klaus you mentioned, which is a total trip. Like just the whole process they went through on that, it just looks beautiful and gorgeous.
So crazy.
I'm really excited actually to see Wolfwalkers, which is a 2D animated film that's in contention this year. It's on my list. I got to watch it shortly actually, because voting is imminent. But that I'm excited about. I want to see Lupin, the CG version of Lupin that just came out.
Yes,
I haven't seen that yet. But there's always something new out there getting me excited. I can't wait to see.
How
that gets me pumped.
So in terms of the volume, because we have had actors on, we've had people who do environmental art, we've had stunt people on who worked on Star Wars. In terms of you being an animation director and your field and your crew, how has the volume altered or changed, better or worse or same, your team and your job, as opposed to being on location more often and taking those shoots? How has that evolved for you?
So far, it hasn't changed my job that much. And what I mean by that is most of the creature, character, robot, monster, dinosaur, whatever work is still post-production. They shoot, whether they're shooting on a normal stage, on the volume, on a backlot, on location, whatever. And then later on, we put our creatures in. Now, that said, there are a few little inroads that in the volume work that, like for instance, in season 1, I think it's episode 5 or 6, where they end up at the roost, that sort of chop shop in space, that kind of
six,
yeah. And that the hangar in the roost, when the Razor Crest first flies in, and Mando has that long conversation with his bearded old friend, and they're walking around different parts of it.
Who calls it the crest?
The crest, yeah. So we did some digital background people for those scenes. So like people welding or just walking on catwalks and things like that were part of the load. What we call the load is the media that's being displayed on the screen, as opposed to, which is separate from actual set deck that's real, that's in the middle of the thing, that props and things that people interact with. So in terms of the digital real-time rendered scene that's on the volume walls, we had digital people walking around doing, like I say, just crossing and stuff, just to kind of fill out the background.
And you reuse all those assets, so Tarkin's back in there somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Leia's up there welding, in a weight thing. No, but they so, and even there, it's not the details of my work or the work of my animation crew, whatever, has changed in an important way. It just got moved up in the schedule. Like now we have to have those digital doubles ready before shooting begins instead of way in post-production. But that said, I'm excited about possibilities. Like, for instance, you could do a thing where you've got the volume, which I think people kind of have their heads wrapped around that now, but it's a big cylindrical stage, and the walls are, I don't know, 20 feet high or whatever they are, and they're all LED panels, and even the ceiling is LED panels. And there's even a final square piece that can be dropped into the gap that exists, because there has to be a gap so you can get set pieces and props and things in and out of volume.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a square piece that can be brought in, so it's effectively a 360-degree jumbotron wrapped around you, right? And we real-time render environments onto those screens, and the camera that's in that space is being tracked so that the renderings have the correct perspective, so that if you have for instance, a path that SetTech has created on the floor where it travels up and hits the wall, if you're not looking through the camera, then the path kind of hits the wall and then appears to go off at a weird angle. But if you're looking through the camera, the path looks continuous, no matter where you put the camera, up, higher, lower, whatever. So it's really cool. Okay, I almost lost my train of thought there. So imagine you've got actors on that and an environment, and right next door, maybe you have a traditional motion capture stage with an actor there, somebody cool like Terry Notary, who's done a lot of, for instance, ape-related motion study stuff for the Apes films, and he worked with us on Warcraft on our orcs, and he trained all the actors to move like orcs and all this. He's brilliant. So say you got Terry on this adjacent stage, and his motion capture is being fed live and retargeted live onto some 15-foot tall creature that's being rendered in real time for the actors to see on the stage.
That's insane.
So they look up and they see this big creature walking around. So their eye lines are correct and they're really reacting to it, moving around them. And maybe Terry, I don't know, maybe he's got goggles or something so he can kind of see where the actors are in VR, so he's moving in an arc.
Yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable.
That kind of stuff really has me excited. And that's down the road a little bit. And to date, there's no specific project that I'm involved with that's doing that, but that's the kind of thing that will change my job a bit when we start doing that.
Let's see
but
if
at the
Terry
moment,
can.
Do you think James Cameron is just going to drop a bomb on us?
Oh yeah, I can't wait to see. I mean, that guy. He can't help himself. He's got to always push and ask for things that are amazing. So I can't wait to see what he does with, and Weta's. They're incredible. They just do amazing work. Weta Digital and Weta Workshop.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm excited for the next round of, Avatar movies.
Yeah.
You see how
it's
excited
been so Hal, it's been so long. It's okay to forget the name of it.
I'm a Cameron fan generally. I mean, the
T2 is still to this day unbelievable.
I just love his story of how he went and saw Star Wars and was like, you know what? I want to be a director. And he was a truck driver at the time, and then went to the library and picked up How to Be a Director books, and then now he's James Cameron. I just love that story.
Awesome.
Did he write a letter though?
Yeah.
Did he write a letter?
Yeah. Where's his letter?
He didn't. He did not.
Who wrote the book that How to Be a Director that James Cameron picked up and read?
I don't know.
But he's somebody I'd love to.
Great.
I'd love to work on one of his pictures someday, but hasn't happened yet.
I want to ask you about.
I know you watch the podcast.
Yeah, sure. The Jabba's palace thing that kind of caught everybody by surprise after the big surprise. It's seeing the Rolling Stones and then the Beatles walk on stage or something. It's just seeing Jabba's palace again and hearing Carrie Beck talk about it in the gallery about how they wanted to, and you and everybody obviously wanted to make sure you got it right with the blueprints, the original blueprints from the archives, down to the chandeliers and the wind chimes, and you redo the digital assets for the exterior or whatever you guys do. You hopefully you can get into a little bit on that. Is that something now where it's all right, we have Jabba's palace, we can save that, and now we can bring back Jabba's palace today if we need it? Is that how that works? Where it's we brought back Jabba's palace from 1982 production to 2021. Is that sort of how that works, or is it just kind of it's isolated for that and that's it?
I think it depends, and I say this as someone who's not intricately involved in set building, set budgeting, what happens to sets after. It's largely a world I'm not that familiar with. I would hope that given that they had a title that said, the Book of Boba Fett coming 2022 or whatever, or 2021, that they did save that set and it's in storage somewhere and they'll trot it back out and set it up and use it. But honestly, I don't know.
Well, you know what Jon Favreau says? He'd make stuff to make models, so maybe that model he wanted. So they just made it so that he could have
it's at his house now.
in his house.
That was definitely with the Razor Crest. That was always a joke with us, was like, because, we got to season 2.
Guillermo del Toro said, I think. He's the one that's like, if you want something cool, make people make models and then you get to keep the model, I think is what he told Jon Favreau.
He was, so when John Knoll and I, when we worked together on Pacific Rim with Guillermo, that was, Guillermo was very upfront about that because he had Spectral Motion do these amazing maquettes of every Jaeger and every kaiju. And, when I say every Jaeger, like here's Stryker in like knee deep in this like acrylic ocean wave that's breaking and all the little lights on it
beautiful.
Can be turned on. And, it wasn't just some like, here's a rough maquette. It was like, sideshow studio quality, whatever. It was, I think Spectral Motion built those, but just saying like, and he was very upfront about it. He's like, yeah, these are all going in Bleak House when this is done. And,
I was going to say, I picture him driving away from set that day with it strapped in the front seat with the seatbelt over it. Just
with
like,
the seatbelt, exactly.
And so John,
time to go.
And we get, we had some of those
Wife sits in
maquettes
the
at
back.
ILM while we were building our digital versions. But of course, we had to keep very good care of them because we knew that Guillermo was going to want to put them in his house when he was done.
Man, that's funny.
And he did. But John and Joe always joke about that. But it was only half joke because certainly half true about the Razor Crest that, although I think it's still at ILM at this point, although there's not much point in us holding on to it now. I think it's about time to send it to him and got it into his house.
Rest in peace, Razor Crest.
I mean, that was a tricky thing on season 2 is
Razor
because on season 1 we didn't do all the shots with the model. For instance, when it takes off and lands, that's digital because we didn't engineer a model with working landing gear and all that kind of stuff. Plus, it's just tricky. There's a lot of crazy axes of movement, so it was more for flybys in space or approaches to planets or leaving planets that we targeted for our miniature shoot. So then when we came to season 2, we were kind of thinking, we're in the same mode. But then you start reading the scripts or seeing the previous, and in the first, 4 episodes, every other episode, the ship's getting trashed.
Or he's got a dog fight in this episode. He's flying up, reversing. Yeah. You're like, well.
Yeah. So we knew that stuff like that, like in atmosphere stuff, we're like, or like the cloud chase with the X-Wings. We're like, that won't be the miniature. That's just not suited to it.
Which was awesome, by the way.
Yeah, but then it gets all messed up on the ice planet. And so the end of episode 2 and the beginning of episode 3, we couldn't do any of those shots, like it leaving the ice planet and heading toward Trask in the beginning of episode 3. We couldn't do those because we didn't want to trash the miniature. Miniature didn't have all that damage and we didn't want to trash it. So we had to do those shots digitally. And then it's hot re-entry into Trask because we weren't going to do that with the miniature anyways. But then even once the Mon Calamari repair it, it's still too messed up.
It's all cargo
net and
it's all
string
ropes.
and cardboard and I don't know. And
so funny.
But then he gets it fixed up. And so then we got to do just a quick handful of shots. I forget if we had any leaving Navarro, but we definitely had it heading to Typhon. So there's a couple shots out in space there. And then, not Typhon yet. Dave Filoni's episode, the
where Ahsoka is?
Ahsoka is, I can't think of the planet. But so coming toward that planet, some of those are miniature shots, and then also leaving and heading to Typhon are miniature shots. So we only have a few miniature shots of the Razor Crest in season 2, but
Corvus.
We got to do a whole other shot. Yeah, Corvus, thanks. We got to do a whole other shot or a ship with Moff Gideon's light cruiser, which was a 5-foot model. Razor Crest was a 2-foot model, but
cool.
light cruiser was a 5-foot model built by John Goodson, who built the Razor Crest. And man, that thing is just so gorgeous. It's such a beautiful model.
I wonder what John thought after the episode where it explodes. He's at home and he's like, "Oh."
Well, fortunately, the real, we didn't blow up the actual miniature. Although that would have been fun.
Yeah.
Although
right?
if we had, we would have had to make a shell, a replica to blow up. But no, that was super fun. The whole thing of digging into, and it wasn't. We certainly could have gotten. In fact, we had some final shots of the Razor Crest in season 1 in CG, just regular flybys and stuff, before we ever decided to embark on building miniature. But it kind of evolved out of, we're having a little trouble with getting quite the sweet spot on the finish of the ship, because it's not as polished as Padme's, and it's not a matte paint job like the Falcon, right, or the X-Wings, or
right,
somewhere in between. And John said, well, what if we just 3D printed a little one and kind of covered it, painted it, did a paint job on it that is kind of what we think it should be, and then photographed it to give us more information. All right, that's worth doing. And then that evolved into, all right, let's make a little bit bigger, proper model out of it. And then when we were doing that, then it was
snowball.
Like, we could shoot this,
Let's make a
wait,
ramp.
why don't we shoot this thing? So then John Knoll, being John Knoll, went off and built his own motion control camera system, wrote his own software for it. Guy's brilliant.
Unbelievable.
No big deal.
Oh my goodness.
And
I have a funny picture of him from like the 90s where he's just like this, and I was like, I wonder if like that's how he just is all the time. Like, I'm just gonna go write a program.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
All right.
That guy's like Sir Isaac Newton inventing calculus just to solve a problem.
John and I worked on tons of projects together. We're good friends. On Rogue One, he thought up the story for Rogue One, pitched to Kathy, got it greenlit. Yep. I think he has an executive producer credit, but he's the visual effects supervisor. It's a big job. So he's over in the UK as they're ramping into shooting. He's living over there for the duration of the shoot. And he starts just cranking out these tests in the evenings because, he didn't have enough other things to do. And there are things like he did a complete CG build of the landing bay on the Death Star, the one that the Falcon comes in, is pulling in with the tractor beam. Because he thought, we might need it. So he just built it all in Modo and textured it and and rendered out a walkthrough. And I mean, it looks completely 100% real. And he has sound effects.
Oh my God.
And he's got a little mouse droid moving through, and you hear it make a little sound and everything. and then the next thing you know, he's showing me one that he did of the conference room of the Death Star, the big, where Vader force chokes the guy, and that thing with that sort of spheroid thing in the middle of the desk. Again, it just looks 100% real. He's like, in the current script, we don't have any scenes in here, but we might. And maybe we can just do it as a virtual set. If we do, we've got it. And then he did the same thing for the corridor in the Tantive, that white corridor. And in the end, they end up building that set physically. But he was like, we could do it digitally. I've got it right here. Look. And it just looks, and all three of them just look 100% just down to the last detail. You would not know. Like if you just saw those, you'd be like, oh, this is cool. What movie is this from? And he's just knocking them out in his spare time, just because as you do, right? When you're
that's insane.
There's that meme that's like, people pass around that's like, oh, Beyonce is the same hours of the day as you. And I'm like, no, John Knoll has the same hours in the day as me.
Yeah.
True.
That's my
word. No,
oh, God, it's so funny.
I'm a Star Wars fan, but I'm a big Rogue One fan.
Okay.
So that all that stuff is super fascinating.
I love that film. Yeah,
so recently, I'm sure anytime you tweet things, especially
you make me go crazy. First of all, I will personally say, I'll be like, Hal, what are you doing?
The hype with the roller coasters and all that stuff. You definitely got a lot of us.
That was fun.
I'm sure when you send those, are you like,
oh
bang.
Yeah, especially the roller coaster thing. I was like,
you're like, guys, check this out. Look at these comments.
And of course, I have to, I've always got to think a little bit about, all right, what am I actually saying? And it's not, Disney and Lucasfilm don't ride me. I don't get calls from them regularly saying, hey, you shouldn't.
just for
but
fun.
I just, I'm just trying to be a good,
Sure.
employee and like think it through. The one, well, finish your thought, and then
I was gonna say, recently you were posting the walk down memory lane of some Rogue One stuff that didn't make it in the movie, and fans kind of went a little wild about it, like the Vader and Tarkin thing. Was this just a thing where you're like, oh man, I remember that, let me just tweet that because people will enjoy seeing it? Because people always take it and they're like, this must mean something more, and there must be this must be a jab at this or this. Can you just bring some levity or some normalcy to you doing that? And what that's
you're exactly right. In that case, I didn't have any plan. I had posted previous to that, like weeks ago or maybe longer, somewhere along the line, I had posted some, just some snapshots from the set of Rogue One, particularly because the Yavin set was so spectacular. I mean, it's just fun to post a picture or two of, look how cool the set is.
Oh, yeah.
And then that day I had posted like, I forget, some, an X-Wing, I think. And then someone asked me about, do you have any astromech pics? And I was like, oh, actually, yeah. And I found that picture of Chopper and R2.
Boom.
But people dug that.
Matt Martin was like, where
and
am
I knew people would dig that because most people knew he was in the film. A few people didn't. And just people just loved him. They just love that character. And then somebody else in the mentions of one of the threads that was spawning asked about Vader. And I was like, oh yeah, I got a photo of Vader that I like. And the thing is, I knew that scene had been, there were short little clips of it in a couple of the trailers. So I knew I wasn't revealing something that nobody had ever seen before.
Right.
I mean, but then of course I had to open my big mouth and say, I think it was a conversation between Tarkin and Vader, because I guess that was just something a lot of people weren't aware of, that there had ever been a scene like that considered. To me, it didn't seem like a big, I should have thought about it a little bit, because if I had just hadn't said that, people would have liked it. But I think that was a thing where people were like, oh my God, there was a scene at one time. And then you get into this whole thing with people like, when can we see the Gareth Edwards? Because like, man, it's like, I can't even, I'm not even, I can't respond.
That's wild. It is. And it's, why wouldn't Vader and Tarkin were attached to the hip in A New Hope, which is 15 minutes after Rogue One. If he's on the Death Star, why wouldn't he be talking to Tarkin? So like you alluded to, like, this seems pretty obvious to me, but people like to run with it. And, there was trailers where you see Krennic talking to Vader, and you see that shot of Vader with the red screen behind him right after the title pops up in the teaser. So, I mean, all that stuff has come up. One tweet I need to read to you. I have to do this. I'm sorry. Our fans want it. So
all night I've been waiting for John to see how he's going to work to this. And it's been very exciting to see how he's
it's not a deleted tweet. It's there. So here we go. So this person tweeted, trope, quote, I don't know who needs to hear this, end quote, but Solo is really good and needs a sequel. And that is from...
I did write that.
That's from at Hal Hickel. Yeah, November 15th, 2020. So, as you can see the shirt I'm wearing, Hal.
Yeah.
Make Solo 2 happen. Rob Bordeaux has used the hashtag. Jonas Sotomo's used it. A lot of people, Michelle Rejwan told James that she loves it. John Kasdan, Ron Howard, everyone's talking about it. What's the deal? How do we get Kathleen on the horn? How do we get a Solo 2 made? How do we get a series made?
I got a number here. Let me get my foot. No, wait up.
Okay, you got Jabba's palace back. Like, what are your thoughts on Solo? And like, obviously, continuing that with Jabba's palace would make sense. Like Disney Plus. Do you ever think it could happen?
I don't know. I really don't. I'm not trying to be cagey or anything. I didn't work on Solo. Well, I did work on Solo a little bit. I supervised the train heist, the animation train heist.
Unbelievable.
But Paul Kavanaugh, who's amazing, Anim Soup was the main Anim Soup on that. So I kind of came in and helped out a little chunk of it. But I wasn't like Rogue. John pitched me the idea for the story before it even got greenlit. So I felt like I was there from the beginning, even though there's lots of chapters to the Rogue saga that I wasn't privy to. Like I didn't spend a bunch of time with Gary Whitta when he was at Lucasfilm writing it, because that's not my job. And I was probably finishing another project when that was happening anyways. But I was there for the journey and most of the journey and a lot of the twists and turns and all that. Solo, I barely, I worked on one sequence, and when Paul was the main guy. But I just liked the film. I posted that because I had rewatched it for the first time in quite a while. I just finished watching it, and I was like, God, I really liked it. And I just, and the only reason I put trope at the beginning is just because I don't know who needs to hear this is maybe meme would have been a better word than trope.
Yeah.
But it's a thing.
Sure.
It's a thing that people lead off with in tweets.
Of course.
Twitterism.
Yeah.
But I had rewatched it, and I was like, God, that was great. I'd love to see these characters keep going. And I like Alden Ehrenreich. I think he was great. And I know there was some Ehrenreich. I know. I think and there's some folks who were like, why didn't they cast this guy? That? And that's fine. That's all valid. But I happen to like him. I loved L3 as a character. I know she doesn't make it through the whole film, at least not in one piece, or actually in only one piece, I guess. Or whatever. But
she's gone the way of the Razor Crest.
Exactly.
Only one little bit survived.
But I love Lando. Help me out here.
Donald Glover.
Donald Glover.
And I love that guy. I love Atlanta.
Oh yeah.
He's Childish Gambino. I like
Community.
Yeah. And so, I'm there for it. I just don't have any special. Unfortunately, I don't have any special insight. Like, well, your friend, your listeners should stay tuned because it's like I have no clue. Partly because honestly, Mandalorian has just completely taken over my whole life for the last couple of years.
Sure.
There's such.
Sure.
I mean, big summer temple films typically have around 2,000 visual effects shots for a really big visual effects thing. Now, for really big, some of those shows might get up closer to 3,000, like the final Avengers, Endgame or something. I don't know what the shot count there was, but I'm sure it was well over 2,000.
Oh man,
shots.
Yeah.
But Mandalorian season 1, which we completed in roughly the same amount of time we would a big effects film, actually less time than some big effects films, had just under 4,000 visual effects shots.
Unbelievable.
And season 2, just under 5,000. So my whole life has been complete. Like, I don't have time for
oh my goodness
anything else, sadly, these days. But,
no more. So no more of your tweets. What I'll talk about is there was a tweet that was going around that people like to respond to, and it was name a moment in television that changed the way you view television. And this was before we had you booked, so I'm not here to give fan service you or praise you here. I quote tweeted it and said, when I saw the Crate Dragon on Chapter 9 of The Mandalorian. And I really mean that because I was a big Game of Thrones fan, and I compared seeing the Crate Dragon to the dragons from Game of Thrones that I thought were unbelievable. And I feel like that show changed television, no matter how people feel how it ended or anything like that. Seeing what you guys did with the Crate Dragon, it felt like a major motion picture, even with the aspect ratio changes and all that stuff. But and then seeing you talk about it and how you made the full belly of the beast, even though it's never going to be seen on the surface. Can you just please just feed the nerd in all of us and dive a little deeper than maybe things you may have said in the gallery in terms of what that was like making it, what it feel like seeing the reaction to it, the feeling of achievement, all of that. Can you touch on that whole thing? Because really, it launched season 2, and it took Mandalorian to another level that I didn't think it would reach. So can you just please, for our audience, let us know what the deal is with that?
Well, it was super fun. It was hard, but it was super fun because number one, John Favreau directed that episode, which he was a showrunner, but he didn't direct any of the season 1 episodes. So this was his first time taking the reins on one of the episodes. So that was great fun. And I love giant monsters. I've been a giant monster fan since I was a little kid, starting with King Kong, then the Godzilla movies, and actually all the Japanese kaiju, Gamera, all of it. And then Pacific Rim, et cetera, yada, yada. So I like big creatures. I like the challenges that those present. I'd never gotten to do a dragon, let me think. No, never gotten to do a dragon before. And this was it was fun to take. John does this great thing where he takes a sort of obscure little details from the original films, like an Ugnaught, right? He'll take an Ugnaught and then make it a main character, or IG-88. He creates
Sure.
a new IG droid, and puts it front and center rather than just this thing you saw in one scene briefly. He loves doing that. And so the Crate Dragon, of course, we only saw the skeleton in the dunes, and now let's figure out what this thing is. What's its life cycle? What does it do? How does it? And so that's all just super fun. You started this off though talking about the dragons in Game of Thrones, but did you know that our visual effects supervisor on the first 4 episodes of season 2 was Joe Bauer? Joe Bauer was the overall visual effects soup on, I think, the last 6 or 7 seasons of Game of Thrones. He wasn't there very beginning, but for pretty much all the important dragon work, he was the visual effects supervisor.
I was going to say the dragons.
Okay. So was that a lot of carryover in terms of how it was created, or?
I mean, he had also worked with John on that movie that Jon Favreau made with Sony that was a kind of a follow-up to Jumanji, but it was space.
Zathura?
Oh,
so
Zathura.
Joe, or no,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Well, yeah, maybe Zathura, but actually I think also Joe worked with John on Elf. So they definitely worked together, but I thought Zathura as well. I could swear. I don't know, I have to look it up. But at any rate, so they had a relationship going way back. But as well, I think knowing we were going to be doing a big dragon, that might have factored into John kind of pulling Joe in to
Hey,
work on this.
dragon guy, you want to do
Yeah.
more
Do you have a dragon guy?
Exactly.
Who's your dragon
and Joe
guy?
is great, and so we worked together all through all the first 4 episodes.
Oh, that's awesome.
But the dragon. So yeah, we built, because Doug Chang his art department had done these awesome renderings of the whole thing, head to tail, with like 27 legs or how many legs it has. It's like a centipede dragon. It has tons of legs, and all these great renderings of it, like perched on rocks and looking very dragony. And John's instinct right away was, let's keep it more like Jaws, where you just see it kind of cruising through the sand. And I kind of dug that because there's an old Outer Limits. I think none of you probably know that Outer Limits, but it was a show that was around the same time as the original Twilight Zone, with similar kinds of odd stories. And there was an episode where these 2 astronauts land on what looks like this sort of sandy planet, but then there's this creature that surfaces and moves through the sand like it's in a pond. And I found that really creepy as a kid. And so I had that in the back of my head. Yeah, that'll be great.
Oh man.
And so there were all these conversations about, okay, so it must have some kind of internal organ that produces a vibration that will liquefy the sand so that it can swim through it. And we never, go ahead.
Can I jump in? Do you know who Mark Rober is on YouTube? He does science experiments and stuff, and he did a video of a giant sand structure
with the air,
and then he was putting vibrations.
Vibration.
Yeah. Air and stuff to liquefy it so that things were moving through the thing. And I remember when they were discussing that on Gallery, I was like, I wonder if they saw that video or referenced in that video when they were thinking, how does this thing move through the sand? Well, if you can put out the right type of energy, then you can swim through sand like it's water and stuff. And it immediately took me back to his own scientific discovery.
I may well have seen his video at that time, because we researched all that stuff. We looked at stuff where it was sound waves, and then the other thing where they're just blasting air up through sand. And there's a great one where it's like a sort of a hot tub sized thing full of sand, and when they blast it with the air from below, you can climb right in it like a hot tub. But if they turn it off,
and then the second you turn it off, you're locked into the sand.
So yes, I have.
So
I have
cool.
seen his video.
Yeah.
So we talked about all that stuff, because we thought at one time we might actually do some gags like that with actors, right? Where after the thing is passed or as it's passing, maybe you cut to one of the extras in the little town, for instance, the first time we see it, and we see somebody like sinking down into it or stuck in solid sand afterwards, being pulled
Grogu
out.
Stuck feet up.
Exactly. And then that stuff just never ended up making it all the way into. John became less interested, or I forget what, in that particular telling that particular story. He wanted to stay focused on the dragon, I think, or who knows, I can't remember. But we definitely
make it more scary,
talked about all that stuff and looked at all those videos and everything, which was really fun. And then our we've got ILM has 5 studios. So we have San Francisco, Vancouver, Singapore, London, and now Sydney. But our Singapore studio did the lion's share of the work on episode 1 in terms of the dragon and the banthas and all that stuff. And so this guy Zaini Muhammad, who was our anim soup, and Jeff Kepper-Greco, who was our VFX soup in Singapore, they just knocked it out of the park. Like the dragon animation, but then also all of the sand simulation. Because water simulation is hard generally, but now you're doing something that isn't quite water. It's got to kind of move like water, but it's sand.
Yeah.
It gets a little far
Right.
away from the dragon. It needs to go back to being solid and everything. So there was all that to work out. But it's super fun.
Wow.
Like just having the thing come up.
Crazy.
Did that make it harder or easier to hide mistakes?
Oh, harder. It was all hard. I mean, it was out in broad daylight, all that sand interaction, plus all the people firing crap at it the whole time, and explosions and smoke that it's got to interact with and everything else. So it's tough. It's really tough work.
Insane.
And I'll tell you, there hasn't been nobody has ever said to any of us on this whole journey of doing Mandalorian, oh, by the way, this is TV, so you guys can all dial it down a little bit. Like, nobody ever says that.
I'm good. I'm glad. No offense to how hard you have to work for it, but that kind of takes me to one of my last main questions, at least from myself here. So obviously George Lucas was always a perfectionist. He even J.W. Rinsler had pointed out that it was from his book that I have over there, Making of Empire Strikes Back, that George even added some stuff to Empire after it initially was released at the very end and stuff. And he, always wanted to update his original trilogy. I watched The Phantom Menace the other day. Love the movie. It has aged really well as a movie. Some of the stuff does look like it was made in 1999 because it was. Oh, yeah. Do you, as a person in your industry, like look at Toy Story 1 compared to Toy Story 4 or Episode 1 to what you could do now with The Mandalorian and say, it would be cool if we could run through that, make a special edition of the prequel trilogy if George signed off that it was okay? Or do you like saying, look at what we were able to achieve in 1999 and freeze that in time and say, we put a stamp on what we did then? How do you feel about that as a creator in your field?
I'd rather leave it alone. And that's not a knock on George doing the special editions or anything. I totally understand his motivations, particularly at that time period where Jurassic Park had just happened, and he felt like, now I can get in and tweak some things that I could never tweak. But just me personally, I'm not super interested in revisiting stuff I've worked on, and even if I'm not involved, I like the charming just history of it. Like, okay, that's what it was at the time. Yeah. And I'm fine with it. It's funny because we were, I think this was between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. And I worked on Phantom Menace and I worked on Attack of the Clones. I didn't end up working on Sith because I was on the first Pirates film. But George was still tinkering. He was doing some stuff, and I said to Rob Coleman, who was the animation director on the prequels, I said, Rob, you know what? If we're gonna get in there and modify stuff, since George has put the Jabba scene back into New Hope, we have a way better CG Jabba asset that we had made for the pod race in Phantom Menace. Mm-hmm. But that job is way better than the one that we did just a few years earlier for special editions. The special editions were wrapping up just as I came to ILM. I didn't work on them, so Rob went to George and proposed it, and George gave him the go ahead. He's like, okay, smart guy.
That's cool.
He wants to do it, so let's do it. So we did it. And even that, now that I look at that, there's things in it I'd like to improve. There's some shots that I personally animated that I feel look a little spliny because it's only a handful of shots. It was me and another animator, this guy Sean Curran, one of my best friends. I ended up animating the handful of shots, but I was a little too. I never liked the gag where Han steps on Jabba's tail, and it was a big reaction. And I don't know if you remember how it looked in the special edition version, but it was a really big reaction. His eyes really bugged out.
Yeah. It's like those toys you squeeze and the eyes pop out.
Yeah. And I was like, makes Jabba look like, I don't know. So it makes him look weak. So I actually did an animation test where I had hands passes behind him, because the problem was always that Jabba's got this big tail, right? And in the choreography that they did when they just had an actor playing Jabba, he just crossed behind him. So they had to solve that, and what they came up with was to have him step on his tail. So I came up with a version where it was as if Jabba was kind of turning as well. So you could sort of imagine his tail in a curve that Han could miss and go behind him. And it was still the same choreography. And that was so clever. I thought, look at this. I've made the scene better. And and at that time, because Rob, on Phantom Menace, I was an animator, and then Rob had bumped me up to lead animator. And then between Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, I got my first shot at being an animation supervisor on AI, this Steven Spielberg film. So after that was done, Rob brought me back onto Attack of the Clones as a supervisor to handle some scenes for him to help him with the workload. And so when that was all done, and we were doing this between episodes 2 and 3, and we were doing this test, on Attack of the Clones, one of the great things that Rob did for me was when I would show my sequences, instead of handing them to Rob to present to George, Rob was like, no, you'll sit down with George and you'll present your sequences, which I'll always be grateful for, because
that's cool.
It gave me an opportunity to work directly with George, which I'll always treasure. Right? But in this case, with this test, this was really just something like Sean and I, we did our animation takes. We got a rough version of the sequence together. We gave it to Rob, and Rob showed it to George. And I'm in the back of the theater, just listening in to hear what the notes are. And George, it was the only time I ever saw him get a little bit mad at somebody. And nobody could be mad at Rob, because Rob is just the nicest guy you'd ever want to meet. But he was sort of gently mad at it. He's like, what happened to the tail thing? That was my favorite part of this whole scene. Rob, I didn't even want to change the scene. You talked me into it. Now you're taking up my favorite thing. And I was in the back just going,
oh my God.
Oh no.
I love it.
Afterwards, I caught with Rob. I'm like, geez, dude, I'm so sorry. He's like, oh, it's fine. He goes, just, put the tail gag back in.
Oh my God.
So now the only change I got away with was Jabba just kind of looks a bit grumpy now as Han steps over his tail, instead of like a big like wah. He just kind of So I got away with that change, and I do think the asset the model that we had did look a lot better. But again, now that's 20 years ago. So now when I look at it, I think, well, it could be better still. But I personally don't want to let's go back in.
I
and
appreciate
do it again.
that.
I was like, we did it. It's fine.
You look back on your letter, it says underneath his signature, P.S. Don't touch Jabba's tail.
Exactly.
Right.
Dude, don't.
I know what you did.
I always loved working with George. He was great. When we were doing, like, I remember on Phantom Menace when we were getting into the pod race, and some new character that we hadn't had a chance to animate yet would come out of rigging and be ready to animate, and Rob would ask George for some guidance. Who is this character? What's he all about? And it could have been like, Rax Terrell or Ben Quadraneros or, one of the pod racers. And George just immediately spin into a backstory, whether it was, and I never could tell if it was he'd actually written it out and thought about it ahead of time, or if he was just making it up on the spot. It didn't matter. He was so invested in it. Because, here's the thing, especially once the prequel started to come out, you would hear people criticize him sometimes and say things like, oh, he's just, for years now, he's just been into this for the marketing and the money. He just, he's not, or this or that. You could hear that now and again. If you worked with a guy for 5 minutes on any of those films, you'd know that he just loved that universe. And he's like, well, this guy
lived and breathed it.
This guy considers himself sort of a space pirate, but he isn't really. He's a faker. He's kind of a dilettante. And his machine doesn't work very well because he lost a lot of money gambling and he hasn't been able to spend. He would just like immediately have all this like stuff about the character.
Oh my goodness.
We'd be like, oh, that's fantastic.
I wonder if these are people he like. There's this guy in high school I didn't know. I'm gonna make him Sebulba. Like, just like
it could be because certainly for a lot of names, he you could tell where he borrowed things from. Like there's a the local Indians in our neck of the woods here are the Miwok. and I think that's where he got Ewok from. And there's all kinds of things like that. If you just live in this area that you just notice signages and towns and things, you think, oh yeah, okay, I can see where he grabbed that from. So it wouldn't surprise me at all to find out that there are characters that are based on.
We named the dog Indiana. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So, that's exactly right.
Yeah. Exactly. Which is, a venture you guys are probably going to be involved with is the new Indiana Jones, which Kathleen Kennedy's filming this spring. So are you excited to revisit Indy? Did you obviously, I assume you worked on Indy 4?
Nope, I haven't worked on Indy yet.
Okay.
No, I was, okay. I don't know what I was busy on when they were doing 4, maybe Pacific Rim, I forget. I was on other projects. So I haven't had a chance to work on one. I don't know if I'll have any, probably not. Just looking ahead at what I can see on my horizon, I probably won't be involved with it. But ILM will be working on it, and I'll be excited about it. And to be honest, Jim Mangold is amazing. Like, I think that guy's a phenomenal filmmaker. So I think of all the people I could think of that they, like when I heard that announcement, I was like, holy shit, that's perfect. Because if you look at what he did with Logan, before that movie came out, would you have ever imagined a Marvel superhero movie like that?
Zero chance.
I was like, what? And then this last year, Ford versus Ferrari, man, I love that film. I thought it was just terrific.
I just saw that finally last month. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm really excited about that film. But I probably won't have anything to do with it. I'll try and keep an eye on it while it's happening.
You think Ford still has it in him?
Oh, sure. I think so.
Do you think he can beat Ferrari?
I just watched Call of the Wild, and I really enjoyed it, actually. I'd seen some, different commentary on it when it came out. It wasn't nothing horrible, but you know what I mean? People were like here and there about it, but I saw it and it really tickled me. I kind of liked it. It reminded me of kind of family adventure films of a bygone era that don't get made that much anymore. And I kind of dug it. I mean, I would have maybe made the dog a little less anthropomorphic in its acting, but that's just a choice. I enjoyed the animation very much, but it was me. I might have settled in for something that was just a little closer to it's just a dog, but it's got a lot of personality, rather than a dog that really acts and does things. But but you know what? That might have been the wrong call for kids. Like maybe kids would be, not that it was only for kids. Like I said, I think I kind of think of it as a family film, but it may be that sweet spot they hit is exactly right for kids, because my kid's too old for me to know what little ones want. But I really enjoyed it. I dug it, and I was actually thinking about it when I saw the film. I thought, I think he's got absolutely another indie film.
I hope so. I can't wait to check that out.
Look, the way he punched people out in The Force Awakens, I was like, he could still.
And you get those indie sound effects, those indie punch sound effects.
Yeah, I love it.
There are some films I try to stay away from, because we have a lot of security procedures at work, this, that, and the other. But supervisors are generally encouraged to look at other shows, to share knowledge and give opinions, and that. Sometimes it's formalized where we'll all get together as a group and look at some work from a recent show. Sometimes you just sort of snoop around in other shows and kind of look at what they're doing. But I remember when Force Awakens was happening, I was like, I'm not going to look at anything. I don't want to see anything. I get to be a fan, because I wasn't working on it at all in any capacity. And then finally, like way toward the end, I had a moment of weakness, and I went poking around and looking in some of the sequences that you could sort of access through certain
folders and drives.
And I was, and the very first thing I saw was the big moment between Ben and Han on the bridge. I was like, well, good. That's it. I guess no point.
So I put in my 2 weeks, and I said, "That's it."
Just pure chance too. I was just like, what the?
My reaction just now is the reaction I had in the theater to you saying that.
Yeah,
no.
Oh, boy.
Although since then, honestly, it may not even be possible for me to do that going forward, because we've had, ILM's been very good. It's always been very secure over the years, but the industry has had some hacks and leaks and different things that have just created basically more and more security as the years go by. So it's possible that I won't even be able to snoop around on,
they're saving you from yourself,
indie
Hal.
film. Yeah, exactly. Unless again, it's in one of our sort of forums where we're kind of putting together a brain trust to look at stuff, which happens sometimes. So I'll look forward to that. But yeah, I was like, oh, geez, really? And I just picked a sequence because the sequence just have initials. I didn't know what it was. I was like, well, I'll just pick one. And I looked at him, it's playing through, and I was like, oh, God damn it.
Hal just does it to himself. He's like, oh, God.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess I do like that you made me think of another question then, because like these legacy actors, and like we're saying goodbye to them, Harrison Ford via Star Wars, and Hamill thought he was done with Star Wars with Ep9, and then you see him just really just seems so grateful in terms of bringing young Luke back. And some fans were bit by that, but you could see him like, who doesn't want to see themselves in their prime?
Sure.
And he seems so happy to see that, as if it's a swan song, it's a swan song. I don't know if they're bringing Luke back anymore. I don't know if they're going to like bring him back. I don't know. But what we saw there, and his, like, when you see him tweet that stuff out, and maybe in interviews down the line we'll see him, does that, like, what does that do to you, knowing that you were a part of it, and also he was also a hero of yours growing up? Like, does the kid in you meet the pro in you, and how does that all come together? And how does that feel?
No, it's been super exciting. I mean, I don't think we've ever heard Luke say, "May the Force be with you," have we? Like in any of the films or whatever. Like, so hearing him say that,
I don't think so. I think of Leia, but I don't think of him.
Ben says it, and even Han says it.
He may say like "you too" once or something. Yeah.
So getting to hear him say that line, I mean, it's nothing better. Like I was flying that whole day. The day that we did the shoot was just, I hope I don't ever get blasé just generally about the work, but I do really love being on set, which Corona has made that a lot harder. But we'll get back to some version of normalcy eventually. But I really like being on set generally. Like you mentioned earlier, you were talking about the Jabba throne room. That said, I mean, I was like, because I'm not there every day all through shooting. It's just not a reason for that in my role. The visual effects supervisor is there. Richard Bluff is there, every day, all day during shooting. But I'll go down frequently when they're shooting stuff that, or for meetings or whatever. And I just happen to be there because that scene didn't require my presence, the throne scene, but they happened to be shooting it a day that I was down at Manhattan Beach. And so I, of course, I had to go. I got to go check out this set.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. So certainly the stuff with Mark, I was already excited. I'm already excited to be there anyways, because I just love being on set. But that day, I don't think my feet touched the ground at all the whole day, particularly, afterwards. It was just like, I just buzzing. So exciting. And Mark's just, as everyone knows, he's the nicest guy in the world. I mean, I really didn't, I got to say hello to meet him and, and be part of some group conversations with him, but I didn't, it's not like I got to sit down and have lunch with him and chat with him at length or anything, but he's just so kind and hardworking and invested in what we were doing and everything, so yeah, I'm thrilled that he's happy. If he's happy, I'm happy.
Yeah, I mean, we're all happy. We all lost our minds. Good. Unbelievable. Yeah.
Cried. Stood up like the Super Bowl for the last 10 minutes of that show. I'm not even kidding. As soon as the X-Wing came in, I was like, and I was standing at like 3 a.m. in my house like, no, they didn't. And like every hint you guys gave, which was like, his hand and then his hood, the belt buckle. I'm like, no.
And I love, Peyton Reed's a super fun guy to work with. He was great. It was a really fun work. I've not worked with him before this last season, and he did both episodes 2 and 8. And all that's, he was great with all those flipping over those cards for the audience. Let's keep him, initially they'll be black and white.
And he's another one, big fan.
Yeah.
And then, he had said on Twitter how big of a fan he was, and like he showed a picture of Luke Skywalker that he had on his bedroom when he was little. And I was like, this is what I love to hear. Like people like you and Peyton Reed who are working on these things that you guys just care so much. And you've cared your whole life about this that I'm like, they're doing it for me. You know, like as a fan, they're there too. And it's just so exciting to hear.
You know, and I'll be the first to admit, I mean, you guys, for instance, there are loads of fans who could put me to shame in a, you know, an all around sort of Star Wars trivia contest, for instance, particularly if we're talking about stuff like outside the movies, right?
Sure.
Extended universe books, things like that. Because my focus when I was younger was really on the movies, the original trilogy, and still kind of is in terms of my love of Star Wars, which is why I feel super grateful to have worked on both Rogue One and Mando, because they're so close in the Star Wars timeline to the original. Yeah. But, you know, you could ask me anything about the visual effects making of the original trilogy, and I could probably tell you know what I mean? That's a trivia contest. I can win. Right. But we have, you know, so I love Star Wars, so I'm a nerd about it. John is. Filoni, massive nerd for Star Wars. So, and
you don't say.
And he worked so many years with George directly, you know, side by side with George on the animated shows, that, you know, someone can, and Doug Chang, we've got Doug is a wealth of knowledge about design and the look of Star Wars and what makes things feel like Star Wars. So we're always having conversations about, particularly if we're designing something newish, a new town, a place we haven't seen before, some set, a droid, whatever it is. There's tons of nerdy conversations about, well, have we seen this before in anybody? You know, no. Man. But, you know, in season 1 of Rebels, there was a blah, blah, blah. You know, Dave will say, well, you know, we did a thing kind of like this or whatever. And it is, you know, and there are a bunch of other people in the mix that are also super Star Wars nerds that, you know, because it's important to John to not just do whatever. Like he wants to honor people's love of this whole franchise, and he certainly wants to do new things when he can and you know, surprise people and all that. But when we're doing stuff that's, you know, especially stuff that's legacy, like, you know, we're doing a particular X-Wing or we're doing a droid that's got to look a certain way or whatever, he's super he and Dave and everybody on the show are super invested in getting it right, you know, so that it feels like what we think people want to see. It
shows that dichotomy between them. I feel like each one fills the nooks the other one has, and it's a good yin yang that they have, because Favreau would be like, oh, that was a deep cut, huh? And Filoni's like, not really.
Yeah, it's awesome. They're like a comedy team, those two.
It feels like
they really are.
Yeah. Oh man, that's amazing. I am out of questions. We've taken a lot of your time. James, Lacey, do you have anything else do you want to throw Hal's way?
I do, but I'll have to save it for next time, because I just feel like we've used up so much of your time. I could keep going and going and going, and people have things to do, I'm sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, we would love to obviously have you back sometime down the line, but we want to thank you really so much for your time. This has been great. I know our listeners are going to love it, and you know, we could have kept going on and on for sure, but we want to let you get out of here and enjoy the rest of your evening. But
awesome. It's been super fun.
Yeah, thank you so much, and keep doing the work you're doing, because it is unbelievable, and we look forward so much to what you guys have in store for us in the future, and the best to you, and health and happiness too during this nutty time.
Thanks. Likewise. Yeah. Stay healthy, everybody.
Thanks.
Post a picture of your letter, though. Don't forget.
Yeah, I've actually got to because it's at work. So I can't even access it right now. I mean, at the studio, which I haven't been to since last March. But I know I have a photo of it around.
Have John Knoll make a render of it. That's all.
Yeah, John, can you make me a virtual version of it?
Yeah. And then tell him to come on the
show. Thank you, Hal.
You bet.
Thanks, Hal.
Thanks very much.
There you have it. We hope you guys really enjoyed that interview with Hal Hickel. First off, we want to thank Hal for your time. Generous beyond belief with the amount of time you put in and the stories you told us and everything. So better than I could have imagined. Hal was a fantastic interview. very informative, entertaining, funny. I don't know what else to say, guys.
He was awesome. Hal, I am such a big fan of yours. I was before this, but now I'm even more of a fan. And now my Twitter account is a Hal Stan account, so that's where we're at.
There you go. I got to start writing letters to people.
I know, right?
Yeah. I wrote a letter to J.J. Abrams and I said, no.
Yeah.
I actually really connected with that story because it reminded me of the Mark Hamill thing where I was like, you have that split second where you're like, should I ask? Always ask.
Yeah.
You got nothing to lose.
There's a real humanity to Hal, and a lot of those stories are very similar to things that we've gone through. That's a good point, Lacey, that you're saying, should I ask? I've been in this situation. You're kicking it over. I mean, even John said the story about when you guys were at the premiere and stuff, and it's like all of a sudden it's like, Big Bob is there, and it's like, and you just kind of like you're unsure what to do in those moments. I know, and I wasn't gonna say it like during the episode, but like we were talking right at the beginning about what is it like when you start to get into a conversation with someone, you don't know if they're gonna be like crazy Star Wars fan or not. Like I have that history with the band where people are, it's like, I don't know if I want to mention like I was in a band or whatnot. And then you're like, oh, what band are you in? You're like, you say the name of the band. It's immediately like, it's either going to go down this route or it's going to go down this route where it's like almost embarrassing that they don't know what or anything about it.
So basically the John route or the Lacey route.
Yeah.
2 routes.
It's crazy. I don't think John knows that much. Did you know much about my band? It doesn't really matter.
I heard of you guys.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right, that's fine. But no, I mean, I felt very connected to him on that level, and was bought in immediately on the episode, and it really like paid off as far as just being able to chat to him like a real person. Because I mean, that we forget sometimes that these people, they have the craziest jobs, but they are just people.
Yeah. And he's connected through the George era, and it's just more proof when we have these types of people on the show that Star Wars is still very much Lucasfilm. And, when people lazily throw out terms like Disney Star Wars or Not My Star Wars, like these Doug Changs and Hal Hickels and Rob Bordeaux's,
Dave Filoni's,
all these people are still around, still making this stuff, and probably better than ever in terms of what they're able to do. So thanks again to Hal.
And big fans too.
Yes,
that's the other thing.
Huge fans. And thanks again to Hal. Hopefully one day we can revisit with you again and chat some more, because I feel like sometimes at some of those topics we just scratch the surface, But thank you again so much for your time, and our best to you in these wild times, and keep making awesome Star Wars. So thanks, Hal. But we want to thank everyone for listening and watching. Share this episode. Let people know, like, check this conversation out with Hal Hickel. I know he's, bopped around and stuff, but this was a real fun one. And make sure you do subscribe to the show. Tell your friends, especially your Star Wars nerd friends, on this one. So you can subscribe to us everywhere. Obviously, YouTube at youtube.com/Star Wars Newsnet videos, and also all your audio platforms, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, SoundCloud, wherever you get your podcasts. Amazon Music, we're on there too. Sometimes I forget about that. And head to StarWarsNewsNet.com for all of your Star Wars news, reviews, editorials, information, and more. If you love us so much that you want to support what we do here at TRB, go to patreon.com/Resistance Broadcast. We have 5 tiers there where you can support us, starting at $2 a month. Basically just saying you believe in TRB and you back us. And we have a bunch of extra content on there and exclusive rewards, a cool Discord server, monthly mailings, a lot of great stuff, and more to come. So we appreciate everyone's support there, especially our generals. And I wanted to give a shout out to them now. Carmelo, Andrew Staley, Jeremy Myers, Neel Shah, David Probus, John Risi, Micah Harrison, Jetta Rosewater, Michael Gaines, Russ Harbison, Kendall Gelner, Paul Olsen, Jake Houchins, Jeff Connary, Oliver Lewis, Dave Hornak, Frank Grande, and Val Trichkov. Thank you all so much for all of your support.
Thank you.
We love you. And you can find me on Twitter at Johnny Hoey and StarWarsNewsNet.com and Just Like the Movies podcast. Lacey?
You can find my Hal Hickel Stan account at Lacey Gilleran on Twitter and Instagram.
Nice.
And also follow The Resistance Broadcast on Instagram at The Resistance Broadcast. Take some screenshots of you listening to the show and tag us, and we'll include you in our story.
Yes, absolutely. James.
Twitter and Instagram at Myra Trunks, and also on this YouTube channel, not on Resistance Broadcast, but on Book Discussions, where we talk about Claudia Gray's Into the Dark. Spoilers there. If you haven't read the book, we got a video for you that just tells you what happened. So check it out.
Yeah, and we'll finally give our overall thoughts, the three of us, on what's going on with that on Monday, now that people have had time to digest on that. But until then, everyone, enjoy your weekends. Listen to this episode again, because I feel like this is one of those episodes where there's so much you're going to be like, I need to run through that one once more. But
just listen to me giggle for an hour and a half.
Yeah. So thank you all so much. Enjoy your weekends, and we'll see you Monday morning right here on the Resistance Broadcast. See you around, kids.